Hi everyone, this is Laura Slade, and today we're going to be talking about the hormonal control of the male reproductive system. So remember that the male reproductive system is really responsible for two main functions. The first one is to produce sperm, and the second is to be able to transport and deposit sperm into the female reproductive system. This process of making sperm, which we call spermatogenesis, is an incredibly intricate and fine-tuned process, in part because of the very specialized structure of a sperm, where we see the head at the top region of the sperm with its 23 chromosomes in it, and the very special tail that we see on the end of the sperm, which is responsible for its motility. But also because males make up to 100 million sperm per day, and they can do this from the time that they reach reproductive maturity during puberty, for some males right up until the day that they die. So today we're going to talk about how that process is regulated. But first, let's talk a little bit about what it means to be male. So as we discussed in an earlier lesson, male sex determination first of all is determined by chromosome complement. So in general, if you have a Y chromosome, you're going to develop as a male. But the development in terms of anatomy actually begins in utero, and that means while you're still a fetus in your mother's womb, in her uterus. In particular, we begin to see the formation of external genitalia at 8 weeks into gestation. External genitalia have finished forming by the time that males are born, but their internal reproductive systems are not fully developed until the end of puberty, and for most males, that is at about 10 to 13 years of age. Now, puberty, this period of time in which the male reproductive system becomes fully matured, this is actually a process that is triggered by hormones. And then the production of sperm is continually regulated by hormones throughout the rest of a male's life. Let's start with a quick overview of the hormones that we're going to be talking about in today's lesson. So first of all, we're going to be talking about 4 endocrine glands that are responsible for these hormones. Well, actually 3 glands, where the testes includes 2 different types of cells that produce hormones. So first of all, we're going to have the hypothalamus produce a hormone called gonadotropin-releasing hormone. Based on Unit 1, we should already be familiar with the idea of tropic hormones and the fact that these are hormones that control another endocrine gland. And the endocrine gland that the gonadotropin-releasing hormone controls is the anterior pituitary. Once again, we should be familiar with the fact that the anterior pituitary secretes lots of other tropic hormones which are involved in controlling processes. In this case, there are actually 2 hormones that the anterior pituitary produces that are going to control male reproduction. They are follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. These should sound familiar from our last lesson on the hormones that control the female reproductive system. They are one of the sex hormones that are actually seen in both reproductive systems, and by the end of today's lesson, we should be able to compare their role in females versus males. The next endocrine gland we're going to talk about are the testes. In particular, the seminiferous tubules in the testes are going to produce a hormone called inhibin, which we're going to find out about today. And the interstitial cells in the testes produce the male sex hormone testosterone. We're familiar with this as being one of the main male sex hormones, although it is also produced in females to a small extent. So let's continue by looking at how these hormones interact with each other and find out what their targets are. So the hypothalamus is going to act as the first stage of control over male reproduction. And the hypothalamus produces a hormone called gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which we can abbreviate as GnRH. Now, it's the action of the hypothalamus increasing its secretion of the gonadotropin-releasing hormone that's going to trigger puberty in males around age 10. Kind of gets the ball rolling. And in particular, the effect that gonadotropin-releasing hormone has is that it stimulates the anterior pituitary. As we saw in our sneak peek, the anterior pituitary can secrete one of 2 hormones in response to gonadotropin-releasing hormone. The first one that we'll talk about is luteinizing hormone. This is abbreviated as LH. And what LH is going to do is it's going to stimulate the interstitial cells within the testes. Now remember from our discussion of the male reproductive system that the function of the interstitial cells is to produce and secrete testosterone. So that's really the role of luteinizing hormone here. It is to initiate the production of testosterone by stimulating the interstitial cells. And one of the effects of testosterone production is an increase in secondary sex characteristics. Remember, these are the things that are not directly involved in reproduction, but we still associate with being masculine traits. So, during puberty, when the hypothalamus increases its secretion of gonadotropin-releasing hormone, that means that the production of testosterone also increases, and it's going to stimulate the development of these secondary sex characteristics like facial hair and a drop in the tone of your voice, and the production of some more muscle mass. The other hormone that is released by the anterior pituitary in response to gonadotropin-releasing hormone is follicle-stimulating hormone, and this is abbreviated as FSH. The role of FSH is to stimulate the seminiferous tubules within the testes. Remember that the seminiferous tubules are responsible for spermatogenesis. This is the process of producing sperm. Now, we mentioned that spermatogenesis is a pretty delicate process. The sperm have to be formed just right in order for them to be motile and actually be able to make it to the location where they're going to find an unfertilized egg in the female reproductive system. And so there are several levels of control of spermatogenesis. In fact, testosterone is also involved in initiating spermatogenesis. That means that follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are ultimately both responsible for proper production of sperm. And if either is out of balance, it could cause low sperm count. Now, we mentioned that the seminiferous tubules also do produce a hormone. This hormone is called inhibin. And actually, inhibin is named perfectly. Its function is to inhibit something. In fact, what's going to be inhibited is actually the anterior pituitary. So inhibin inhibits the anterior pituitary from producing more FSH. And that means that when high levels of inhibin are present in the blood, it's going to stop the stimulation of seminiferous tubules and stop the production of inhibin and slow down the process of spermatogenesis. In fact, testosterone has a similar role. Testosterone is responsible for inhibiting the anterior pituitary from releasing more LH. That means that high levels of testosterone in the blood are going to stop the stimulation of the interstitial cells of the testes and lower the production of testosterone. So no matter which endocrine cells we're talking about in the testes, what we're going to see is that there's a negative feedback mechanism that's going to help maintain the proper levels of sperm production and testosterone production in the male reproductive system. Remember that negative feedback mechanisms act just like the thermostat in your house. What they're going to do is maintain an overall balanced level of, in this case, hormone and sperm production by making sure that small changes never become large changes. What that means is that if there's an increased production of testosterone, it is going to actually inhibit any more testosterone from being produced. So the levels of testosterone in the blood will drop. Once they've dropped low enough, that'll mean that the anterior pituitary is no longer inhibited and it can start making LH again, stimulating the production of more testosterone. So although levels of testosterone in the blood are continually going up and down, they're never going to change too far past that normal balanced level. The same is true for the process of spermatogenesis. It's going to be maintained at the optimum level by successive increases and then decreases in the level of FSH produced. This negative feedback mechanism controlling spermatogenesis and production of testosterone usually continues from the time of puberty right into old age in males. However, let's talk about some things that you can observe when something in this process goes wrong. First of all, let's talk about andropause. Andropause is the male equivalent of menopause. It's a condition that results from hormone imbalance later in life. In particular, what we see is that some males stop producing high levels of testosterone as they get older, usually around age 40. And if you don't produce testosterone, then spermatogenesis is also affected because, to some extent, spermatogenesis relies on testosterone to make that process happen. Males who are experiencing andropause can also exhibit other symptoms. For example, they often have low levels of energy, they start to lose muscle mass and bone mass, and they can experience an enlarged prostate. And this is evidence to just how many different systems testosterone can affect. Not just spermatogenesis, but testosterone actually has lots of other, more subtle roles in the body. Another cause of hormone imbalance is the use of what we call anabolic steroids. Remember that we talked about steroids being fat-based hormones, which means that they are not water-soluble, they are made of lipids, and they often travel right through the cell wall and have an effect inside their target cells. But when you hear people talk about steroids in conversation, they're usually talking about athletes or bodybuilders who are taking synthetic steroids to help increase their muscle mass. Now, these synthetic anabolic steroids mimic testosterone, and that means that they kind of take over some of its functions. In particular, and the desired result, is that they cause an increase in muscle. So your muscle cells can actually repair faster after a workout. You can work out more often, and that's going to allow you to increase your muscle mass at a much faster rate. The problem is that anabolic steroids are not capable of taking over all of the functions of testosterone. In particular, they do not stimulate spermatogenesis. But here's the real problem. Anabolic steroids look enough like testosterone that they do inhibit the anterior pituitary. And that means that taking these synthetic steroids stops the production of luteinizing hormone, which stops the stimulation of the interstitial cells and does not allow for natural testosterone to be made. So if you don't make testosterone and anabolic steroids don't mimic its spermatogenesis functions, then that means that spermatogenesis cannot continue. And a lot of males who take these synthetic anabolic steroids actually have decreased sperm count and might become infertile. So to review, we've looked at the function of 4 different endocrine cells found in the male reproductive system: the hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, interstitial cells, and seminiferous tubules. And we've discussed the hormones that they produce that are responsible for producing sperm. Gonadotropin-releasing hormone stimulates the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary makes either follicle-stimulating hormone or luteinizing hormone, where follicle-stimulating hormone promotes spermatogenesis and luteinizing hormone promotes the production of testosterone. And of course, we've observed the negative feedback mechanism that controls the levels of these hormones, and a few effects of what can happen if these hormones are out of balance. As a review, I encourage you to compare the male hormonal control of reproduction to the female hormonal control of reproduction. See which hormones are similar and have a similar function, and which mechanisms are different. So you give that a try, and I'll see you next time.